I used to sit at the very back of the classroom, invisible to everyone. No one remembered my birthday. No one noticed when someone shoved my books to the floor. I was Lina Harper, the orphan everyone whispered about, the girl with nothing to her name. Every day felt like a test I was destined to fail. The elite kids in their perfectly ironed uniforms and sparkling shoes would laugh at me without even trying. "Hey, trash bag Lina, bring your broom," they sneered once, and I bit my tongue instead of yelling back. That was the safest way to survive. But that day changed everything. It started with a letter, crisp, official, and completely impossible. My hands shook as I tore it open. "Miss Lina Harper, you are hereby notified that you are the sole heir to the Harper Corporation, valued at over $2 billion. My eyes widened, my mouth went dry. Billion? 2 billion? I laughed. It had to be a joke. There was no way a girl like me, with holes in her shoes and no family, could inherit one of the richest empires in the city. Yet, the documents were real. The signature was real. My parents, my real parents, weren't lost to the world. They had only been taken from me. And now, after years of living in shadows, I had a chance to step into the light. I didn't feel excited. Not yet. I felt scared. The same streets that used to whisper my name in mockery would now have to remember it in fear or respect. But I didn't want to be cruel. Not like them. I wanted justice. I wanted balance. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror of my tiny apartment, brushing the tangles out of my hair. The reflection staring back was still the same Lina who had cried herself to sleep every night, but I knew something had shifted. There was power now, quiet and heavy, just waiting to be used. The next morning, I walked past the same elite school that had humiliated me, the same gates where I had once begged to stay unnoticed. The uniforms gleamed, the air smelled of expensive perfume, and the laughter rang through the hallways. And for the first time, I didn't flinch. They didn't know yet. Not a single person did. And when they did, oh, how their faces would change. I took a deep breath. This was my beginning. Lina Harper, the girl with nothing, was about to become Lina Harper, the girl who owned everything. And maybe, just maybe, I could finally forgive the world for breaking me. The limousine rolled up to the gates of Crestwood Academy, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt untouchable. The iron gates gleamed under the morning sun, and the same students who had once laughed at my torn shoes and messy hair now paused, their eyes flicking toward me. Inside the car, I adjusted my new designer coat, a gift from my father's assistant, not a mere indulgence, and smirked. It was strange, how something as simple as clothes could change the way the world looked at you. Yesterday, I was invisible. Today, I was someone to be noticed. Someone to be reckoned with. I stepped out, heels clicking on the marble driveway. Heads turned. Whispers followed me down the hall. "Is that Lina Harper?" I smiled politely, holding my head high. The girls in their pristine uniforms stared, mouths slightly open, unable to believe it. And the boys? Some of them looked impressed, others intimidated. The power I had once dreamed of was already here, flowing effortlessly through every glance and gesture. Then I saw her, Madison Carlyle, the girl who had thrown my books into the trash during freshman year. She was leaning against the lockers, smirking, just as she always had. Only now, her smirk faltered. Her perfectly polished world had just collided with mine. "Lina Harper," she said, a little too loud. "Is that really you?" "Yes," I replied sweetly, letting my voice drip with calm confidence. "It's me." Madison's friends exchanged glances, nervous. They had spent years making me feel small, reminding me of every flaw. And now, I was the flaw in their perfect little lives. I walked past them as if they didn't exist, though I could feel their eyes burning into the back of my neck. Every step was deliberate. Every movement, poised. I wanted them to remember me, not the Lina they mocked, but the Lina they would never forget. I found my new locker and ran my fingers over its polished surface. No scratches, no dents, perfect. I thought about how many times I had opened lockers in this very hallway, my fingers trembling as I hoped no one would notice me. How ironic that now, everyone would notice me, whether they wanted to or not. As the bell rang, signaling the start of first period, I overheard whispers behind me, "She's back, and she's rich." I allowed a small smile to creep onto my face. Not cruel, not vengeful, just satisfied. Sweet revenge didn't have to be loud. It could be quiet, elegant, unstoppable. And yet, I didn't want to hurt anyone unnecessarily. Not like they had hurt me. I wanted to reclaim my dignity, To show them that kindness could coexist with strength. That was the real power. The first class passed like a blur. Madison kept stealing glances at me, clearly trying to figure out who this Lina was. I didn't give her any hints. I didn't have to. Soon enough, she would see everything, my success, my confidence, and the respect I commanded, and realize how wrong she had been. By the time the final bell rang, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Not just for revenge, but for myself. I was no longer the girl everyone looked down on. I was Lina Harper, the girl who had been invisible, who had risen from nothing, and who would now write her own rules. And this was only the beginning. The morning after my triumphant return, I couldn't stop thinking about Madison and her friends. Their faces haunted me, not in a scary way, but like a puzzle I was finally ready to solve. Years of humiliation had given me one advantage: patience. Revenge didn't need to be immediate. It needed to be precise. I walked into the cafeteria, my heels echoing like a warning. The chatter dimmed slightly as everyone noticed me. I held my tray calmly, pretending the attention didn't matter, though inside, I was buzzing with quiet excitement. And then I saw them, Madison, Rachel, and Tiffany, my old tormentors, huddled at their usual table. They had the same perfect hairstyles, designer backpacks, and air of superiority. But now, something was different. They were cautious. They were aware. I smiled politely. "Mind if I join?" I asked, my voice soft but commanding. Madison blinked, clearly thrown off. Sure, I guess." I sat down between Rachel and Tiffany, letting my presence fill the space. The table went silent. Madison's eyes narrowed. I could practically hear her thinking, "Who does she think she is?" But I wasn't there to argue. I was there to observe. Every flicker of doubt, every hesitant glance, every tiny slip in their carefully maintained arrogance would be my advantage. Over the next few days, I began making small changes. Nothing obvious, nothing cruel. I offered to tutor struggling students in math and English, and suddenly, the quiet girl no one cared about became someone others sought out. Teachers noticed. Classmates noticed. And yes, even Madison noticed. One afternoon, I found myself in the library, pretending to study, when Madison approached. Her usual smirk was replaced with a tight-lipped frown. "You really are different now," she said, leaning against the bookshelf. "It's unsettling." I looked up from my book, feigning innocence. "Different how?" "Confident. Wealthy. Popular." Her voice was a mixture of envy and fear. "It's like, I don't even recognize you." I closed my book slowly, giving her a soft smile. "Maybe you've never really known me," I said. Madison hesitated. I could see it, the first crack in her perfect armor. It thrilled me, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I was finally claiming the power that had always been mine. That evening, I returned to my apartment, sitting by the window and staring at the city skyline. 2 years ago, I would have looked at those skyscrapers and wished I could live in a world like that. Now, I was part of it. And I realized something important. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming myself, about proving that being powerless didn't define me. And yet, I couldn't ignore the flutter in my chest when I thought about the future. There were challenges ahead: jealous classmates, curious teachers, and perhaps even people who wanted to take my inheritance. I would need allies. I would need strategy. And most importantly, I would need patience. Sweet revenge wasn't just about making people pay. It was about becoming someone they couldn't ignore, someone who had the strength to forgive, to rise, and to heal from all the wounds the world had inflicted. As I closed my journal that night, I whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning. Soon, they'll see the Lina Harper they underestimated, the Lina Harper who is unstoppable." By the start of the next week, I could feel the energy in Crestwood Academy shifting. The halls, once a battlefield of silent humiliation for me, now seemed like a chessboard, and I was finally holding the pieces. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every careful nod from a teacher reminded me that my presence was no longer optional. It demanded attention. Madison and her friends were struggling. I could see it in the way they held their heads a little lower, in the tension in their smiles, in the way Tiffany avoided my gaze entirely. It wasn't just fear, it was the first taste of humility, and it was intoxicating. I had decided it was time for my first deliberate move. Nothing flashy, nothing cruel. Just a reminder that the Lina they had dismissed for years was gone, replaced by someone no one could ignore. During lunch, I approached a table crowded with students who had once laughed at me, ignored me, or worse, humiliated me. Mind if I join you? I asked, smiling warmly. Heads turned. A few students froze mid-bite. But I didn't wait for permission. I slid into the chair, holding my head high, my presence commanding. Of course, one girl said, clearly relieved. We'd love to sit with you. I laughed softly. It's about time I had some friends who don't throw my books in the trash, I said, letting a playful edge slide into my voice. The table erupted in quiet giggles, and for the first time, I felt the sweet warmth of belonging. Across the cafeteria, Madison's jaw tightened. She was watching, of course, unable to look away. That subtle look of fear mixed with envy was exactly what I wanted. But this wasn't about humiliation. This was about rewriting the rules. Later that afternoon, I was called into the principal's office. My heart thumped, not with fear, but with anticipation. Lina, the principal said, gesturing for me to sit. I understand you've returned with quite a few changes. Yes, sir, I replied politely, keeping my tone calm. I want to contribute, to help students feel included, and to make this school a better place. He studied me, as if measuring every word, every glance. Finally, he nodded. I see potential in you, Lina. Leadership potential. We'd like you to consider applying for the student council next semester. The words barely registered before I smiled. Of course, sir. I'll think about it. As I walked out, a thrill ran through me. Influence, recognition, authority, all were within reach, and I hadn't even begun to fully claim them. Back in my room that evening, I looked in the mirror. The Lina Harper staring back at me was calm, poised, and confident. Not arrogant, not bitter, but she was dangerous in her own quiet way. And I liked it. My thoughts drifted to Madison. Soon, I would need to confront her directly, not to humiliate, not to seek revenge through cruelty, but to make her understand that time, patience, and dignity were weapons stronger than mockery ever could be. The best part? She would never see it coming. As I prepared for bed, I scribbled in my journal, the rules have changed. The Lina Harper they knew is gone. I am the Lina Harper they must respect, or they will learn, slowly, that underestimating me is the biggest mistake of their lives. And for the first time in years, I slept without fear, knowing that the life I had dreamed of, a life where I controlled my destiny, my happiness, and my dignity, was finally mine to take. The halls of Crestwood Academy felt different now. I wasn't just walking through them, I was gliding, aware of the power in every step, every glance I gave. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The Lina Harper who had been invisible for years was gone. Madison and her friends were still trying to maintain control of the social hierarchy, but cracks were appearing. The smallest gestures betrayed their insecurity. Rachel nervously adjusting her hair when I passed, Tiffany hesitating to sit in her usual spot, and Madison herself, who now studied me like I was some kind of puzzle she couldn't solve. I decided it was time to plant the first seeds. It began quietly, during morning classes. I noticed a girl named Emily, quiet and often overlooked, struggling to keep up in math. A quick whisper, a shared notebook, a patient explanation, and suddenly, Emily was smiling, engaged, and grateful. I didn't make it about me. I didn't boast. But the effect rippled. Other students noticed my competence, my willingness to help, and slowly, more of them started seeking me out. By lunchtime, I had formed an informal group. Students who were talented, kind, and often overlooked. They weren't popular, but they were smart, resourceful, and loyal. The real power of a school didn't lie in gossip or designer clothes. It lay in influence, in people willing to follow someone who treated them with respect. Madison noticed immediately. She came to our table, her smirk forced, her words clipped. So, what's this? A charity circle. I looked up calmly, smiling warmly. Just helping each other out. Everyone deserves a chance, don't they? She scoffed and left, muttering something under her breath. But I saw the way she watched us, calculating. This was working. Her circle was starting to falter, and all I had done was show kindness. The next step was subtle. I found small ways to give her circle minor setbacks, nothing drastic, just little inconveniences that made them appear clumsy or unprepared. For example, during a group project, I offered to help coordinate schedules, and of course, my help made my group's presentation flawless, while theirs stumbled slightly. No one suspected manipulation, only competence. By the end of the week, whispers began circulating. Students were talking about me, Lina Harper, the heiress who didn't flaunt her wealth, who was kind, smart, and unexpectedly influential. And the most delicious part? Madison's smirk had finally faded. She had started to realize that this wasn't about money. This wasn't about cruelty. This was about strategy, patience, and quiet strength. That night, I returned to my apartment and opened my journal. My pen moved across the page like it had a life of its own. Day by day, the balance is shifting. Madison's reign is fragile. They think they're untouchable, but the Lina Harper they remember doesn't exist. They've underestimated patience, kindness, and intelligence, the real weapons in any war. I paused, looking out the window at the city lights. There would be challenges ahead. There would be confrontations. There would be moments when patience would feel impossible. But I was ready. I had waited too long, endured too much, and now, I held the advantage. The Lina Harper who had been nothing, who had begged to be unseen, was gone. In her place stood a girl who would not only take back what was hers but do it with grace, intelligence, and dignity. And someday, Madison and her friends would understand the truth. Underestimating me had been their biggest mistake. By mid-semester, the balance of power at Crestwood Academy was shifting so subtly that most students didn't even notice it. But I did. Every glance of admiration, every quiet nod of respect, every small favor offered by teachers reminded me that I was no longer invisible. It started with Mr. Wallace, the history teacher who had always ignored me. One afternoon, he called me after class. "Lina," he said, hesitating as if weighing his words. "I've noticed your initiative, helping classmates, participating in discussions, keeping your work impeccable. Have you considered running for student council?" I suppressed a smile. This was more than an honor. It was an opportunity to formalize the influence I had been building quietly. "I'll think about it, sir," I replied, calm but confident. "Thank you for noticing." Walking out of the classroom, I felt a rush of possibilities. Student council meant resources, authority, and a platform to implement the changes I wanted. To show the school that leadership wasn't about money, popularity, or intimidation. It was about intelligence, empathy, and strategy. Of course, Madison noticed too. That afternoon, she cornered me in the hallway. Her eyes were narrowed, her tone sharp. "You're really going to run for student council?" she asked, a tremor of something unidentifiable in her voice. Fear, maybe, or begrudging respect. "Yes," I said simply, keeping my expression neutral. "It seems like the logical next step." She opened her mouth to retort, then shut it again. I could see the frustration bubbling beneath her polished exterior. I didn't need to say more. My calmness was enough to unnerve her. Over the next few weeks, I ramped up my efforts. I helped organize events, volunteered for school programs, and quietly mentored students. Every action made me more visible, more respected, and more admired. Meanwhile, Madison and her clique struggled to keep up. Their usual tactics, gossip, subtle exclusion, and intimidation, were losing effectiveness against my growing influence and calm confidence. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the announcement for student council elections. The principal publicly praised me for my initiative, subtly implying that I was a frontrunner. Whispers filled the hallways. "Lina Harper? Running for student council? She's actually impressive." Madison's face betrayed a mix of disbelief and panic. She had been so certain that I would remain powerless, invisible, and ignored. But now, every person she had once dominated was watching me, inspired by my quiet strength. That evening, I stood by my bedroom window, looking at the city lights. I thought about the path that had brought me here, the years of being ignored, bullied, and underestimated. And yet, here I was, finally in a position where I could shape my world, not just survive in it. I wrote in my journal, letting the words flow like a promise. The Lina Harper they thought they knew is gone. Soon, the school, and maybe even Madison herself, will understand that patience, intelligence, and dignity are more powerful than cruelty. This is more than revenge. This is growth. This is my time. And somewhere deep down, I allowed myself a small, private smile. I was no longer a girl waiting for the world to notice me. I was Lina Harper, confident, unstoppable, and finally, free to write my own story. The morning of the student council elections, Crestwood Academy buzzed with anticipation. Posters lined the hallways, colorful and neatly printed, each candidate promising leadership, improvement, and influence. Among them, my own poster stood out, simple, elegant, and understated. Lina Harper, leadership with integrity. No flashy slogans. No empty promises. Just a reflection of who I had become. Walking through the school, I could feel eyes on me. Whispers followed my every step. "She's running. Lina Harper." She might actually win. I held my head high, heels clicking confidently against the polished floor. The power wasn't just in the campaign, it was in the calm authority I carried, the quiet respect I inspired. Madison approached me just before the first voting period. Her perfectly curated smile barely masked the tension in her jaw. "Lina," she said, voice slightly sharp, "I hope this doesn't get out of hand." I looked at her calmly, tilting my head slightly. "Don't worry. I'm not here to humiliate anyone. Just to lead." Her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the gears turning in her mind, the panic of realizing she had underestimated me, again. The voting began, and students filed into the auditorium. I watched quietly, standing at the back, letting my presence radiate confidence. Teachers whispered words of encouragement as they passed, and I felt a sense of calm purpose. This was the moment where all my patience, strategy, and quiet efforts came together. When the results were finally announced, the auditorium fell silent. The principal stepped forward, clearing his throat. "The student council president for this term is Lina Harper." A wave of applause erupted. I allowed a small, polite smile, bowing my head slightly in acknowledgement. Some students cheered enthusiastically. Some glanced at me with awe. And Madison, she froze. Her expression flickered between disbelief, frustration, and a reluctant respect. I walked past her, calmly accepting congratulations from my friends and classmates. Every handshake, every kind word, every nod of approval reminded me that I had earned this, not through wealth, not through cruelty, but through persistence, strategy, and integrity. Later, in the quiet of my office as student council president, I finally allowed myself a moment to reflect. The journey from that small, invisible girl at the back of the classroom to this moment had been long and painful. But the growth I had gained, patience, empathy, intelligence, and confidence, was far more valuable than any simple revenge. I opened my journal and wrote, "Today, the Lina Harper they mocked and ignored no longer exists. The Lina Harper who stands here now is strong, respected, and capable of shaping her own destiny. Madison and others may have doubted me, but I've proven that kindness, strategy, and patience are the real power. This is only the beginning." And I knew it. This victory was not the end of the story. It was a turning point. There would be challenges, jealousy, and perhaps even attempts to undermine me. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel fear. I felt purpose. I felt strength. I felt free. As I looked out the large windows at the city skyline, I whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning, Madison. The Lina Harper you thought you knew is gone. The Lina Harper you will see from now on is unstoppable." And with that, I smiled. Not with malice. Not with bitterness. But with the quiet satisfaction of a girl who had endured, grown, and finally claimed the life she deserved. A few months had passed since the election, and Crestwood Academy had quietly transformed. The halls no longer felt like battlefields of insecurity and cruelty. They were places of respect, collaboration, and ambition. Places where students supported each other rather than tore each other down. As for me, Lina Harper, life had changed in ways I hadn't imagined. My student council initiatives had already improved school programs, and my circle of loyal friends had grown. I still remembered the girl who had sat at the back of the classroom, invisible and afraid, but she felt like someone else now, a shadow I had left behind. Even Madison had changed. She no longer sneered at me or whispered behind my back. There was still tension, of course, but it had shifted into something else, a quiet acknowledgement of what I had accomplished. And maybe, somewhere beneath the pride, a trace of respect. One afternoon, I stood by the large windows of the student council office, watching the sunset paint the city in gold and orange. My journal lay open on the desk, filled with reflections, dreams, and plans for the future. A soft knock on the door made me look up. It was Emily, one of my closest friends. "Lina," she said, smiling, "the new students are asking about you, and they want to join your mentoring program." I laughed softly. "Then we'll make room. There's always room to help someone who wants to grow." It was in that moment I realized the true meaning of what I had built. Power wasn't about wealth or revenge. It was about influence, kindness, and the ability to lift others as you rise. And perhaps most importantly, I had finally learned to forgive myself for the years I had felt weak. The Lina Harper of the past would have envied the girl I had become. But now, I didn't envy her. I celebrated her, for her strength, her endurance, and her patience. As the school bell rang, signaling the end of the day, I smiled and whispered to no one in particular. This is just the beginning. Because it was. There would always be new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities to grow. But for the first time in my life, I was ready. I was Lina Harper, confident, capable, and free to write my own story. A story no one could define but me. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more original novel stories. And stay tuned, our next story is coming soon.